How you doing, everyone? And I welcome you to this episode of 8 Bits in the Basement. So what this is part 2 of my Let's Turn an Amstrad into a Commodore VIC-20 project. As strange as that seems. But what I'm trying to do is I bought an Amstrad quite cheaply. And what I want to do is I want to do it up and sell it on for enough to hopefully buy myself a Commodore VIC-20. So what I did in the last episode was I took it apart, took out the keyboard, gave it a good clean off. It was full of dust. Put it all back together and, well, the keyboard all back together, and tested it out with the motherboard, and we found out that it's working, well, it's working to a point at least. So what I want to do today is the exact same thing, only for the motherboard. So what I want to do is have a look over the motherboard, remove any chips that are socketed, and make sure there's no corrosion, make sure that none of the capacitors are leaking, or that there's no obvious little faults on it. Give it a good clean up, and pretty much a kind of once over service on all the switches and potentiometers and all that kind of stuff, and put it all back together. So that's the plan for today's episode. So hopefully you'll enjoy it. So without any ado whatsoever, let's get to it. Here's the old Amstrad CPC6128 motherboard. So all I did with it really was I just gave it a little brush off with a paintbrush, and you saw in the end of the last episode that it works to a point. It'll take input from a keyboard and it'll spit a picture out onto the screen, and also it'll run a little Hello World program. So what I want to do today is I want to have a little visual inspection over to see that there's no corrosion or anything, see that all these little capacitors are fairly okay. And also I figured what we do as we have it open, we just have a very quick look over and just have a look at what each of the chips on the board, well, what they do, not each of them, what the ones I know what they do. So this guy here is probably the primary part of the board anyway. It's the Zilog Z80 processor, the same type as you'd find in the ZX Spectrum. And that's the guy that runs the show as regards processing on this board. These two guys are ROM chips. So they contain Locomotive Basic, which is the basic programming language on the Amstrad, and also AMS-DOS, which is the disk operating system that'll let us read and write and do all kinds of different operations with our 3-inch disk drive that's integrated on Amstrad 6128. Here we've got a General Instruments AY3-8912 sound chip, which controls all little beeps and all the rest from the system, and any music you hear in games and whatever. These guys here are 16 memory chips. So we've got 2 banks of 64 kilobytes of memory. So in total giving us 128 bytes of RAM, or kilobytes of RAM. What we have here is a PLD, I believe, a programmable logic device. And this guy here is pretty much responsible for mapping out this memory here. It presents the lower memory and the upper memory in the right order to the Amstrad. There are some cases actually where there can be a problem with the upper memory and we won't know unless we access it. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to load up 1 or 2 games that take the full, or need the full 128 kilobytes of RAM in order to make sure that all that's working properly. This guy here is the Amstrad Gate Array. And as far as I know, this is a proprietary chip. It's one of the only chips on this whole board that you can't replace with something you can buy off the shelf. So this is proprietary to Amstrad, and they're a hard enough chip to come by, I believe. This guy here is a Zilog floppy disk controller, and that guy is, well, basically the chip that controls the floppy disk drive. Any of the other chips you see here, any of the 74 series chips, are logic chips. And they're responsible for doing any logical operations and communicating between chips and all the rest, all that kind of thing. There are a couple of chips here as well, which I'll be honest with you, I don't know what they do. There's 3 of them here and I don't know what they do. But apart from that, what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be looking at the I/O ports and all that kind of stuff. So what we have here, I/O port wise, is we've got a stereo output, so we can connect this to a pair of speakers and see if we get stereo sound from the system. Joystick port, a cassette port, and here we've got a second floppy disk drive port, we've got an expansion port, and we've got a printer port. So we'll be testing all that stuff if we can. And yeah, that's pretty much it. What we're going to do, I think, first off, before we go any further, as we know the board is working to some point, is I'm going to pop out these 3 chips that are socketed, and I'm just going to clean their sockets with a little contact cleaner. and we'll put the chips back in, and that way at least we know if there's any corrosion or if there's any trouble like that going on, it should be resolved there, nipped in the bud type thing. Okay, so to remove this little chip, all I'm going to do is I'm going to insert my screwdriver down here and just prise ever so gently. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And eventually, out comes our little chip. That chip looks to be good. There doesn't look to be any corrosion at all on it. And inside in the socket, there doesn't appear to be any corrosion there either. There we go. There we go, liberally sprayed in there. Here. There we go. It'll drop in here. Now, so our board is cleaned up to a point, at least it seems to be fairly presentable. So just to have a little look over and see that there are no, the caps seem to be fine. All of them seem to be in fairly good condition. Yeah, all the electrolytics are pretty much up here. And none of them seem to be bulging. None of them seem to have leaked in any way at all. I believe the only cap that gives problem on these boards anyway is this guy here, the one that's quite near to the power connector, the 5-volt power connector, and it seems to be in perfect condition also. So for the moment I'm not going to touch any of those caps. All that seems to be fine. I didn't see any evidence of corrosion on any of the pins, on any of the chips, so that should be okay too. The back of the board, there's a lot of flux residue, but that's been since the board was manufactured, I'm sure, because I didn't do anything with the back of it. And yeah, so I reckon that that can stay the way it is. It'll be all right. So there we go. That's our board pretty much cleaned, and contacts cleaned. Fingers have been sanded and brushed down a little bit, so they should be okay too. So I guess what we'll do is I'll leave it for a good half hour to an hour to for any of the water that was in the alcohol there to evaporate, and we'll power it on and see what it can do. Now, so just as important to be cleaned as the actual motherboard itself are these. We've got the little potentiometer that controls the volume. So I'm going to just pull off this disc and I'm going to squirt some contact cleaner in here. There we go. And put this little disc back on and give it a few turns. Now, so to open this little switch, I had to prise away these little bars on the side with a screwdriver, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to put some contact cleaner in here now, so that this little bar that it makes contact with in order to turn the system on and off is nice and clean. That's all. And it should make the whole thing work much better. Okay, so here we are the following morning, and I decided it'd probably be best just let this board dry out overnight after the cleaning I gave it, because I poured alcohol liberally on it and I scrubbed it down well, but the alcohol isn't like 99%, it's 70% alcohol, so there's 30% water in it. So I wanted to be sure that it was completely dry before I powered it on. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to connect three things, and the bare minimum, the monitor itself, the power and also the switch so that we can turn it on and off. Now, I have it set up in such a way that it's not directly connected to the monitor. It's connected to a little box that branches out to my video capture card and also back to the monitor here through AV. So the screen will give a little flash every now and again. But just to see that the system is working, that's all we're going to do. So I'll flick this on and there we go. Excellent. We have still got a working system at least. So the board is after being completely cleaned off. I'm just going to pull these guys away. And the reason I want to show it to you this way is actually, yesterday I told you I didn't know what these 3 chips were. So yesterday evening I had a look just to see what they were so I could tell you. So this guy here is our PPI, our Programmable Peripheral Interface. This guy here actually is the chip we're going to be testing when we test all of these I/O ports and all the rest around, because it's that controls all communication with the outside world really for the Amstrad. This guy here is our CRT controller. So that guy is responsible partly for the image that we see on screen. It controls the cursor and it controls resolution and stuff like that. There's all kinds of programmable stuff on that. But anyway, that's its job. And this guy is a data separator for the floppy disk drive. I can't tell you any more than that, but that's what it does. So that's pretty much what all the chips on this board do. Now, yesterday as well, I showed you that there was a little bit of flux residue on the back, and I said I wasn't going to clean it off. Well, I changed my mind on that, and I said as soon as I'm waiting for the board to dry, I might as well clean it off. So I poured a bit of alcohol on it, gave it a scrub, and took it off with a little piece of tissue paper, and that's that. So that's our board ready to go back into its plastics. We're happy enough with that as it stands. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to screw the keyboard back in, the motherboard back in, all the cables back in, and we'll assemble it so that I can test it without potentially breaking anything. That's the idea from here. So we'll get to that. Now, there we go. So there's 4 screws that hold in the motherboard itself, and you can easily tell those because they're marked by a little arrow. Yeah, they're marked by little arrows just in each point. So there we go, that's those. And so I'm after placing my power switch back in with, it's in the off position, so the switch actually in the off position needs to be over to the right hand side because the plastics are marked as to off and on. The volume control knob as well, I'm after pushing back in here. And I've tied all these cables down using this little tie wrappy thing that they have on the board itself. That's a keyboard. And the thing that I like about these Amstrad boards is it's actually quite difficult to make a mistake with them, because what we have here straight away is you'll see that the connectors here are colored. I've got a black one, I've got a white one. On the speaker and the power LED, there's a blue one and there's a white one. And they've actually went ahead and they have colored the pins that they plug into. So the black one here, even though it's marked power switch, so we know that, but we can't really make a mistake if we go with the color coding. The black goes into the black here. There we go, like that. This guy here is our volume control and all the rest, and that's marked down here. It's not actually marked as such, but what they have is they've marked white, black and red on the pins so that we know exactly what way it plugs in. So that plugs in there like that. So there we go, that's that much of that done. And that is the bottom part of the board pretty much reassembled. So the top part of the board takes the keyboard, all freshly cleaned, as you'll remember, and our keyboard sits back in this way. These guys are the screws that we use for the keyboard. So I'm going to put one in the bottom down here. I'm going to put 2 up top on the left and right hand side. We want to pop in now are our LED here. It's in here, and there's a screw to hold it in place too. So that little lead will go down and in there like that. And the speaker just slots in back into this here. Just pushes down in. And now we can feed these cables. They originally went through these things here. I doubt it really makes any difference in a way, but no. So that's that. Yeah, that's that lot put back together as well. So I almost forgot this guy. This guy here we're not using quite yet. This is the 12-volt power supply for the floppy disk drive, and that plugs in here. So that guy will be plugged in here, and this part of the cable goes in there, so we can put it back together with that guy on. So the final thing to do really is to connect the keyboard membrane and also these guys. So the blue one here plugs into the blue over here, and whoops, and the white one here will plug into the white guy here. There we go. And we have our keyboard membrane, which I'm going to plug in. Okay guys, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to call it a wrap there at that for today. Originally what I had intended on doing was putting the system back together and doing all the I/O tests in this episode, but after editing it, it was almost 40 minutes long, so I decided it'd probably be better to split it into 2 episodes. So hopefully I'll get the second episode, which will be part 3, out by the end of this week for you to watch. So in that one, what I'm going to be doing is testing all the I/O ports. So like say the second floppy disk port and the expansion port, cassette port and all that kind of stuff. I'm pretty much checking out the system is working correctly, that it can use all its memory. Yeah, we'll be running memory tests and all that kind of stuff too. But anyway, that's it for today. So hopefully you enjoyed this. If you did, give us an old thumbs up, because it seems the more thumbs up that a video gets, the more YouTube will propose that video to others to watch. So that'd be great if we got a couple of thumbs up on this one. If you haven't done so already, think about subscribing, and I'd love if you left a comment or 2 down below. So that's it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Hopefully by the end of the week, there'll be another video coming up, so keep an eye out for that one. And I'll be waiting for you down here in the basement. As ominous as that sounds.